Greetings, Benazir.
How are you, David?
Very well indeed, and yourself too, I trust. How is the Pakistan you now see different from the Pakistan you left 8 years ago?
I do believe Pakistan is under increasing threat of an extremist takeover. And to save the country, I believe we must restore democracy.
Benazir Bhutto returns to Pakistan today after 8 years in exile, defying warnings of an assassination by Al-Qaeda and vowing to restore democracy to a homeland.
I would like to thank all of you who are here and accompanying us on the plane journey back home. This is a very critical moment in Pakistan's history.
There is real threat to the life of Mohtarma Benazir. There are credible and corroborated intelligence reports that terrorist groups are out to target Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto. The government is advising her to avoid long public exposures.
I am unaware of the details of the security arrangement, but I think the biggest protection comes from God. And God willing, all will go well.
You think that Benazir Bhutto will have a third term as Prime Minister of Pakistan?
Well, this is up to the people of Pakistan. I've served them before, and it would be a privilege for me and an honor for me to serve them again.
We are here just for the Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto.
Are you from Karachi?
Yeah.
Also Karachi? What was that? What was that? Attack?
On August 14, 1947, a new nation was born.
Pakistan, created by separating the Muslim regions of India from the Hindu.
History is made. Our people rejoice. Independence for India and Pakistan.
When the British begin their departure, an era ends and a new era begins.
As the new dominions of Pakistan and India take over their own affairs, millions began a journey that over the months was to become the greatest mass migration in history.
The country was born in confusion.
People who thought they were in Pakistan suddenly realised that they actually were in India.
The rapes and brutal mass murders during partition affected both India and Pakistan.
Anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million dead.
Many will never reach their new land.
More than 60 languages are spoken.
The national language became Urdu.
But English is the official language, used in business, government and legal contracts.
It is the Muslim faith which holds the nation together.
Tension between Hindus and Muslims of India always ran high.
When India and Pakistan won their independence,
the partition led almost immediately to disputes.
Pakistan's very existence depended largely on adequate military strength should the dispute with India assume uncontrollable proportions.
The borderland Kashmir has been a disputed territory ever since.
the UN succeeds in obtaining a ceasefire.
Pakistan has never managed to get control of all of Kashmir.
You're making it very clear to both Pakistan and India that war will not serve their interests.
More than half of Pakistan's 63-year history has been spent under military rule.
A shortage of jobs, of justice, of good schools, of electricity and running water are the state's everyday failures.
Pakistan has achieved a literacy rate of only 67% for men, only 42% for women.
Government spending on education is just a small fraction of government spending on the military.
Money was pumped into weapons and into Pakistan's religious seminaries or madrasas.
For years, theirs has been a radical, ultra-conservative message.
Those same madrasas would go on to produce the extreme Islamist Taliban movement.
Honor killings, a traditional cultural practice, are widespread and legal.
Murder has been condoned by the state in the case of these barbaric killings.
19 people were killed in the explosions, more than 50 wounded, among the dead at least 4 police officers, often in the front line.
The militants' campaign is ferocious and widespread.
After 9/11, things changed dramatically.
Pakistan, a country with an extensive nuclear arsenal, is facing a very serious security challenge. In 1953, 6 years after the birth of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto was born.
I was born on June 24th, 1953. My mother says nobody came to see her for 3 days in the hospital when I was born because they were all in mourning. So the girl had been born. I remember once she even mentioned to me that even the dogs were giving birth to boys and even the cats were giving birth to boys. Benazir. So my mother never liked that name either. She made me grow up thinking, I want to keep her name Naila. Naila's such a lovely name, Naila's such a pretty name, but they gave this horrible, ugly name, Benazir.
Benazir means without compare. B means without. Nazir is like, I guess, vision or comparison. Basically means unique, one of a kind. And boy, did she turn out that way.
I am what I am because I am Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's daughter.
Bhutto was the quintessential charismatic personality. He was young, educated.
Zulfikar Bhutto was really a man of the world. He went to USC, and then he transferred to Berkeley, and then he went on to Oxford. And he wanted to be taken seriously on the global stage.
Bhutto was appointed to represent Pakistan at the United Nations. He was able to bring Pakistan in the middle of a lot of global discussions.
I think Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, what he had that made him so special was incredible eloquence, great belief in himself, and then a serious ability to do backroom deals.
Something that is very famous in Pakistan psyche, Bhutto, when he came to Washington, D.C. and met with Kennedy, Kennedy told him, Mr. Bhutto, if you were an American, you will be in my cabinet. Bhutto retorted back saying that, Mr. President, if I was an American, I'll be in your place. Here's a guy who goes to the White House and tells an American president that, you know what, I am better than you. He wanted to make sure that when he was on the camera, his crease was fine in his pants, that he always wore the right set of clothes, that he always wore the right cologne, and every young man wanted to copy him. Whatever he wore became a fashion. Very flamboyant. He was the GQ of Pakistan.
Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was courting my aunt, Nusrat.
The minute my father saw my mother, who was so absolutely gorgeous, I think he flipped and was love at first sight.
I remember my mother being glamorous, well-dressed, and, so competent.
Nusrat was not only a wife, but a close partner of Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. She advised him extensively.
She was Iranian, and she was more modern than the average Pakistani woman. She famously drove a car when Muslim women were not driving cars at all.
The social consciousness of both parents was so powerful that it influenced all the children, not only Benazir, but Shahnawaz, Sanam, and Murtaza. It was like they were going to leave a legacy behind them so that the children could carry on, could carry forward. There was a reason why they were called the Kennedys of Pakistan.
Zulfikar's father, Shahnawaz Bhutto, profited from partition. He received from the new Pakistan larger than they can imagine, like Los Angeles County.
We were landowners, large landowners. My father would tell me, look at the way these people sweat in the heat and in the sun in the fields. It is because of their sweat that you will have the opportunity to be educated. And you have a debt to these people. You've got to come back and pay that debt by serving your people.
In a feudal system, everyone is beholden to the master. And this is what Zulfikar Bhutto, Benazir's father, came from, and what he was trying to change so that there could be some progress in Pakistan. He saw that countries that do well economically have to have some kind of a middle class that give the people the opportunity to move upwards.
For Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, education was the key for everything, not only for his own children, but for the people of Pakistan, because he knew with education, people will be able to stand on their own feet. They'll be productive members of society, and so can create democracy.
It was my father who was against the gender constraints of my time. He enabled me to appreciate that a woman is not a lesser creature.
I wore the veil once. When I was 13 years old, it's really like an initiation right into the world of adulthood. I remember when I wore it, it's hot, it's cumbersome, it's long, you trip over it. You can see the world through that black fabric. And it's not a clear world, it's a muted grayish world. Papa and Mommy went to their bedroom, and Mommy said, Pinky wore her burqa. I made her wear it for the first time. Then he was quiet for a while, quite thoughtful. Then he just looked up, said there's no need for her to wear it. It was an extremely bold step for him to take, because until that time, no woman from the Bhutto family who reached adulthood had ever gone without burqa.
Not too long ago, I sat where you now sit, crammed into class in subarctic temperatures, fighting for books at Hillis Library, cramming for exams.
I met her first day of freshman year at Harvard. She was 16, I was 18.
She was quiet, she was studious, she made a small circle of friends, but this was 1969, and 6 months of her arrival, all the dorms went co-ed.
We were in the same dorm, and she talked a lot about her own family. We have a lot in common. Benazir comes from a political family. She was very interested in politics, was interested in the world.
Not only was she becoming a grown-up, but she was independent for the first time, and her life was under her control, and no one else could control it, not Mummy, not Daddy, just Benazir.
This was the height of the Vietnam War, and she saw firsthand the power of the people to change a policy and to bring down a government.
She was very much exposed to the ideas of equal rights for women, and that was something that very much influenced her life.
It was the first time that I was in an environment where women were treated as full participants in society. It was that early experience, perhaps more than anything else, that shaped my political being.
India and Pakistan, of course, have fought numerous wars, but I think none was more bitter than the War of 1971.
India dismembered Pakistan, it split East and West Pakistan, East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh.
The loss was a humiliation to Pakistan. Not only had their geography changed, but their national sense of self was changed.
East Pakistan was a part of Pakistan, made with our own blood and our own sweat. If India thinks that she's rubbing Pakistan's nose to the ground and that Pakistan can come to a settlement in the way that she's behaving and has behaved in the past, that will then not bring about agreement. There will be endless bloodshed and confusion and chaos.
Bhutto was immediately rushed to the United Nations to negotiate peace with India.
It was great drama for the UN in its relatively young phase.
Yesterday, my 11-year-old son telephoned me from Karachi, and he said to me, "Do not come back. It's a document of surrender. We do not want to see you back in Pakistan if you come like that. We will fight. We'll go back and fight. My country hearkens for me. Why should I waste my time here in the Security Council? You can take your Security Council. Here you are. I'm going."
The UN was not going to intervene on the side of Pakistan. Benazir Bhutto made it very clear that Pakistan would not surrender. He didn't come to New York to surrender. That propelled him into a very strong national figure.
Bhutto could rally the masses, mesmerize the masses.
हमने मंजूर करो 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 कह के मंजूर नहीं किया. अरे समझ जाओ लोगों, समझ जाओ.
He formed Pakistan People's Party. To form Pakistan People's Party, he had a very simple, very popular slogan: food, clothes, and shelter. People of Pakistan were hurting because of the poverty, lack of education. There was no hope of prosperity.
Bhutto just swept the polls. People were waiting for change.
People who chanted the meaning of Pakistan is food, clothing and shelter won the elections with massive majority.
He was a leader. Every organization, army, everybody was supporting him throughout.
He moved rapidly to make peace with India. Certainly his greatest diplomatic triumph was the Simla Accords.
I met Mrs. Gandhi in 1972 when I accompanied my father to Simla. I was wearing my first sari and I was very concerned that I might trip over the sari and it would come undone in front of all the international photographers.
I provided the interest in India. So much newspaper coverage, people wanted to do interviews with me. I was quite overwhelmed. And I remember my father called me one morning and said, "Have you seen these pictures of yourself? You look like Mussolini there. Be careful."
This was a negotiation in which he didn't have very many cards. After all, India was the victorious power. But using his diplomatic skills, which allowed for the return of some 95,000 Pakistani prisoners of war, re-established normal relations between the two countries. This was very much a formative experience for Benazir. She watched her father operate. She had a diplomatic role as his hostess, and she absorbed many of his lessons of diplomacy.
My father always said my daughter will make me more proud than Indira made her father. So my father always had the idea that I was a chip off the block.
We met when we were both in England, and I was at Cambridge, she was at Oxford. I was struck from the first moment I met her by her force of life.
She was very much into the sort of undergraduate student environment, whereby she just had lots of friends.
She loved entertaining, she loved having fun.
I remember one year she'd chosen to have an invitation with written in gold, "Darling, what would the party be without you?"
Harvard was a place where she could really be herself. She wasn't in the limelight. At Oxford, there was a large Pakistani community. She was older, and I think she was thinking about her future career.
It was assumed that she would not go into politics. She did an interview shortly as she was to leave Oxford. The headline was, "No politics for the president's daughter." But at the same time, she had her eye on what was going on in Pakistan.
In 1974, India detonated a nuclear explosion. And so now Pakistan faced India that was 8 times the size
and which had nuclear weapons.
Once India got the bomb, the Pakistani military started clamoring, telling Bhutto, we want nuclear weapons, otherwise how can we compete with the Indians? Bhutto made this famous speech, we will build the nuclear bomb, he announced in public, even if we have to eat grass for 1,000 years.
Bhutto was persuaded by the Ford administration not to go this path.
Dr. Kissinger actually was a friend of my father's and respected him greatly, and he tried to warn him as a friend. So he said, I don't want you to be made a horrible example of, and so you should not develop the nuclear device.
But that didn't quite work with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. It was the nuclear power that essentially broke down Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and the West.
The whole of the West was very, very anti-Pakistan because they thought we were doing an injustice. It was a bad situation.
Like all great charismatic leaders, Bhutto had flaws, he had great strengths but great weaknesses, and very soon he was in trouble with the establishment, with even the people of Pakistan.
His allies became his opponents himself. He started losing traction with everybody who was part of his victory.
Her father had chosen to call elections. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was re-elected. They were contested, and a massive agitation started in Pakistan.
All this turmoil in Pakistan, protests on the street, big rallies against Pakistan People's Party.
He panicked.
He didn't do enough to spread Islam in the country, to appease the mullahs, if you will.
So he thought he would outflank them by pushing through reforms or demands that they wanted. He made Friday the national holiday, not Sunday. He banned alcohol in the country.
His agenda was too wide and too spread out. The large, huge alliance that he had, that pretty much crumbled down.
I'm not arrogant. I would hate to be arrogant or to consider myself to be arrogant. But certainly I am intolerant of certain stupid things.
When you have power and there's only you and you think you're more intelligent than the rest of the country, that's always a mistake.
I start for my winter vacation because it was my father's birthday. That night there was a dinner in honor of my father. I was told, come and meet the new chief of staff, General Ziaul Haq.
Ziaul Haq was selected and kept as the chief of army staff because he was the least threatening general in Pakistan army. At least that's what Bhutto thought.
My father depended heavily on the reports of inter-services intelligence. That this choice would make the army very happy.
He frog-leaped Zia over the heads of 5 other generals. Zia was, on the face of it, very humble. That's the phrase often he used, I am your humble servant. And Bhutto was taken in by this show of deference. And then what had to happen, happened.
मिस्टर भुट्टो की हुकूमत खत्म हो चुकी है। सारे मुल्क में मार्शल नाफिज कर दिया गया है। कौमी और सूबाई असेंबलियां तोड़ दी गई हैं। सूबाई गवर्नर और वजीर हटा दिए गए।
General Ziaul Haq seized power in April 1977. Basically, there was a general election. Bhutto would have won that election, but his overzealous supporters in the state apparatus rigged that election, which created the atmosphere which permitted the military to come back in, with the green light given by the US. Henry Kissinger had said to Bhutto, we will make a horrible example out of you.
The charges that were brought against Zulfikar were never proven. They were not warranted. And so this was basically to get rid of him. And then after that, the troubles began for the family.
I was in my 3rd year in university. My brothers had to go back to school. My mother and my father said, even if they try and take you off the plane, if they do whatever, don't, under any circumstances, come out of the airplane. Just stay there and go and finish your education.
He was concerned particularly for the boys, for their safety.
I never knew what was happening to my family. I never knew what was happening to my father. My brother was in Oxford, so I used to go and try and visit him.
They didn't have that proximity over that last 1 year, which Benazir had with her father. Week after week, she'd go to jail to see him, and it was during that period she had these very intense conversations with him about leadership and about the people.
Once her father was toppled and imprisoned, she now became very engaged, very active.
So here we had overnight another charismatic Bhutto.
He gave her the mantle of the party, and in a normal Islamic society they would give it to the eldest son, but Zulfikar Ali Bhutto gave it to the eldest child, the one he thought could best do the job, and it was a woman.
I suppose that was where I witnessed that transformation as my friend as an Oxford graduate into that debut politician. It was a huge ongoing struggle for the clearing of her father's name. Then things went from bad to worse.
If my father is executed, I honestly do not believe we can talk of Pakistan as it exists today. We cannot talk of a viable country. Pakistan cannot stay united. Pakistan will disintegrate.
Mir went around the world to lobby leaders to try and save Zulfikar from the executioner's noose.
Our message to General Zia is that release my father and hold free election and let the people decide the fate of the country.
We have come out against the military regime headed by General Zia-ul-Haq, which we feel is acting in a manner which is prejudicial.
We were so isolated, and I just used to pretend that it's not going to happen.
Zia knew as long as Zulfikar is alive, Zia can never stay president of the country.
He won't let me off. He knew it. He said, he will never let me go.
What do you think that your father would look back on as his own mistakes?
Perhaps choosing General Zia as Chief of Staff?
The billboards of the evening newspapers was Bhutto to hang all over. I remember being really hit, sort of like in the stomach.
Father, very intelligent, Coriolanus in Shakespeare, finally falls out with his own supporters, weakens, and his enemies pounce on him. The whole story of the Bhuttos has strong elements of a Greek tragedy.
He called the jail superintendent and said, "This is the last meeting." And he said, "Yes." He said, "Has the date been fixed?" He said, "Yes." He said, "For when has it been fixed?" He said, "Tonight." My father said to him, "Then make arrangements for me to shave, to have a bath. It's beautiful earth, and I want to be clean." And he said that tonight I'll be free. My father was very calm, and he talked of family matters. He talked of party matters, and I keep seeing his face. I said that I'd like to hug my father goodbye. He'd been the president, the prime minister. He'd brought them back from the camps of India. They wouldn't even open the cell doors for me to kiss him goodbye. Said, "This is goodbye until the final meeting." And those were the last words he spoke to either my mother or myself.
Well, I don't want to say much. I came just to tell you that what's the personal tragedy. And they've tried to break our father. They've tortured him for 2 years. They couldn't do that. They tried to ruin his political name, and now they've killed him. We have nothing to be ashamed of. They have buried a martyr today.
Zia's rule proved to be the worst period in Pakistan's history. A fear enveloped the country, and many people said, if they can hang Bhutto, who the hell are we?
I don't know, after my father's death, I came back to Pakistan and the whole atmosphere changed. I mean, they kept hauling my mother and sister off to different jails. Everything was under martial law order. I mean, they had a martial law order that our last name wasn't allowed to be in the newspapers.
They turned our home into prison, where nobody could enter, where nobody could go out. When you're in detention, it's not the physical aspect which matters, it's the mental. It's having somebody to communicate with.
Zia did not want any activity from the family. So if the brothers are outside the country and the wife and the daughter is in prison, no activity.
Zia was an Islamist. He began a process of Islamicizing Pakistan.
General Zia said, "We are the true defenders. Israel without Judaism would collapse. Pakistan without Islam would collapse."
He imposed Sharia law.
Sharia is a divine, utopian, heavenly code of conduct. Sharia on earth means whatever the leader says Sharia means. But of course, the area in which they had the most devastation was in women's rights, what's often referred to as the hudud laws. The punishment for these crimes is actually mandated by the Quran.
There was this notorious law under which if a woman was raped, she had to produce 4 male witnesses to the penetration. If she couldn't produce that, then she would go to jail for sex outside marriage, which was illegal.
Public hangings, public floggings.
Harsh though they may seem to us, all those punishments are perfectly acceptable under Islamic law.
People are not allowed to travel. People are not allowed to voice their own opinions.
I believe in freedom of thought, freedom of expression.
People are not allowed to voice their ideas. They're not allowed to do anything at all.
It is freedom with responsibility, not freedom for the sake of freedom or free for all.
What I am sitting and doing right now in this drawing room is a crime under martial law regulation.
Then he had this extraordinary break in his favor. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan.
Pakistan was important from the very beginning. For strategic reasons, you only have to look at a map.
I think the administration thought that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was a major threat to the United States, that the Soviet Union would dominate the northern part of the Persian Gulf, it would threaten Western oil supplies, and the communists would have scored a major victory.
The main task became defeat the Russians, whatever the cost. And that made this squalid dictator into a plucky fighter for freedom. Brzezinski actually went to the Afghan border.
But that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
A lot of these religious primers which were teaching kids in the madrasas, you know, all the jihadi rhetoric, Kaf, the letter K, Kaf is for Kalashnikov. All these textbooks were specially printed by the University of Nebraska. Reagan introduced these guys to the press corps once and said, "These are the equivalents of our founding fathers." And some of us watching at the time was sort of joking, which one is Washington? Which one is Jefferson? You know, where's Benjamin Franklin among them?
The two boys, Murtaza and Shanawaz, were very disillusioned and they went to Afghanistan.
Shanawaz was the youngest of the 4 kids. They all adored him so much, such a nice, kind kid.
He was always smiling. Benazir always talked about him being incredibly handsome and a great charmer. He wasn't as intense and serious as Murtaza was.
Mir had the arrogance of the man of the family. He needed to feel he was doing something, so there was a lot of sort of talk.
There's going to be underground resistance. If not, if you're shot off the street, then you're going to go underneath and blow the hell out of the place. So there's going to be a lot of trouble.
They were trying to build a group from outside the country to overthrow the government of Zia.
Their politics were a bit more radical than hers.
There's been a dramatic development in the Damascus hijack today.
The Pakistan government has been claiming that the man behind the hijacking was the eldest son of Pakistan's former president, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Murtaza vowed to avenge their father's death.
The hijacking of the PIA airliner took place, then it had become very, very difficult.
Has Murtaza crossed the line between political activity in exile and terrorism? The Pakistan government says he has.
Benazir's brothers were branded as terrorists.
In the end, the Pakistan government capitulated to the hijackers, agreeing to swap the political prisoners for the hostages aboard the PIA plane.
Benazir was charged with connection to those terrorist brothers. Zia threw her into a Class C cell, the desert of sin. Class C are the lowest quality cells that there are.
I walked up and down and up and down and up and down. What the hell is there to do when you're locked up in solitary confinement?
She had not talked to anyone for several years. When I went to visit her, she could not talk. She would write on a piece of paper whatever she wanted to tell me because her jaws had locked.
It would be so hard, I can't tell you. And my ear is hurting me.
She had some ear complaint and they called a doctor. They said, you're not well and we're going to give you medicine. But the medicine they were giving her, I think, were tranquilizers because my mother noticed she was becoming like a zombie.
I think his basic thought was that he could kill her.
By the time the Afghan war was in full swing, Zia knew that the U.S. couldn't do without him.
The Reagan administration simply let the Pakistani dictator decide how billions of U.S. dollars would be used to fight the Soviets. And Zia gave them to the most extreme Islamic groups.
That is the period when Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, became a powerful octopus-like agency with a finger in every sphere of public life in the country. Massive spying apparatus, massive budget.
The ISI is the NSA, the CIA, and the Pentagon all rolled into a single body. It is, in some sense, a shadow military force.
The ISI would use enormous funds to actually create organizations which they armed and then used in Afghanistan.
The Mujahideen is the term that we use to describe the diverse groups of militants and fighters, some Afghan, but many from outside of Afghanistan. Fighters all over the world who gathered to repel the Soviet invasion.
Osama bin Laden was a part of that movement. He was a particularly well-resourced and effective militia leader.
We thought that defeating the Soviet Union was so important that we didn't care that we were actually supporting Osama bin Laden and people who were his allies.
As far as Pakistan was concerned, it destroyed the social fabric of that country because you had armed groups backed by the military regime running wild in the country. Another of the sort of numerous ironies, the Americans got rid of Bhutto because of the nuclear bomb. Then General Zia, their man, is in power and uses the fact that he's become absolutely necessary for the United States to fight the war in Afghanistan to basically build the bomb. And that is what he did.
I say that it is the right of any developing country to acquire the modern technology. And amongst the modern technology is the nuclear technology. Nuclear technology for peaceful purposes.
The notion that American military intelligence didn't know about it is just nonsense. They knew what was going on very well. It was a price they were prepared to pay.
In December of 1982, General Zia came to Washington. And as part of his visit, he had a lunch with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The only senator who was on time was Pell, his biggest critic. In the very first question, Pell handed him a letter about political prisoners. Benazir was the first name on the list, and he raised Benazir's case, described her conditions of imprisonment. Zia responded by saying, "Oh no, that's not right, Senator. She's now under house arrest, and she lives in a more comfortable house than any of your senators, and her friends can visit." So I decided I'd go there.
You know, our family home in Larkana, they declared it's a sub-jail, so it wasn't like you could come and go as you wished. So I was always going to Home Secretary's office and this one's office and that one's office, begging, can I go and see them? And then they would let you see them for 1 hour.
I arrived in Karachi, still not knowing if I was going to be able to see Benazir. And on the last day, I came into the consulate, and it turned out that at 2:30 that morning, Benazir had been taken out of house arrest.
She was released from prison only because she was in terrible physical shape. She was in danger of dying, and that's why Zia al-Haq let her out. I take it he didn't want to be held accountable for more Bhutto blood, and she went to London.
I went to the airport, and there was a sea of people. We kind of like a whole herd. We went into this room which had been designated for her to give a press conference. As she began to talk, it was almost the words came out really very slowly to start with, and then suddenly it was kind of a surge of energy.
I asked her this afternoon if in the eyes of President Zia, she was now conveniently out of the way.
What do you mean having me out of the way? How am I out of the way?
Out of Pakistan.
Out of Pakistan, but surely when I was in Pakistan, I was under detention, and I remained acting chairman of the party. Of course, it was very difficult for me to have any communication with anybody, but I tried and I made an effort. I should think that being in a free country or being abroad and not under imprisonment, there is surely a greater degree of flexibility in contacting our party people. Our party, I don't understand what you mean that after my mother and I have left. We have not left Pakistan. We have not come out as political refugees or sought political asylum. We are Pakistanis and we'll go back to Pakistan. That's our homeland. That's where we live and that's where we'll die.
She had to restore her health in terms of leading, a more measured life. And there were some happy times for her.
The Bhutto family would go to the south of France on holiday.
Yeah, they were all there. The two brothers, their wives were there. Nusrat was there. Benazir was there. Sanam was there. And they had met that evening, or that dinner they had had together. And later the next morning, they find Shahnawaz dead. Apparently somebody had poisoned him.
He died in great pain over several hours, his sister-in-law doing nothing to come to his aid. It was a horrible experience for the family.
My heart was pounding. I didn't want to go inside. I looked, and he was lying on the carpet. His hand was outstretched, and he just looked like a sleeping animal. He looked so handsome. He said to me, he's dead. I said, no, try. He said, he's cold. He's dead for hours. And I shouted, you killed him, you killed him, you killed him. Without a shadow of doubt, I feel that he was most cruelly, heartlessly murdered. Well, we would like the French police to find out, but we think it took place within a political context.
Going back with his body, she saw the love and the devotion of the people, and she realized from that moment onwards she had to set in motion the next phase of her life, which was going back to resume an active career in politics.
My father had a vision of Pakistan as a democratic and progressive nation. My family is committed to his vision of Pakistan. We don't fear anything.
I said to her, you need to come to the United States. Persuade Americans that you're not a dangerous radical. She had a charm offensive.
Ambassador Peter Galbraith asked if we would have a small dinner party for a friend of his that was just getting out of prison. And I said, oh, that's intriguing. That was really the first time I met her.
He had a sort of Washington salon, some members of Congress, a whole bunch of journalist friends, and she charmed everybody.
She was speaking quietly. Everyone would sort of lean forward because she was enrapturing.
She would say what she thought, and people would come out of meetings with her saying, my God, I can't believe that she said that. But it served her well because people began to trust her.
She also used her contacts in the Arab world Libya, for instance, she had this ability to live in both worlds.
There was a groundswell of support that was building against the dictatorship. What was left of the civil society, what was left of the NGOs, all were banding together, demanding a reform.
Until the beginning of this year, General Zia outlawed all political opposition in Pakistan. But now, in a new political climate, the way may soon be clear to challenge him in an election. If that proves the case, then leading that challenge will be Benazir Bhutto.
I wanted to perform Umrah for my father. So this was something that I'd wanted to. I didn't know whether I would live or die when I went back. And that's why I wanted to complete my intention.
She wasn't intimidated by generals, by dictators. She really thought she was on a holy mission to bring democracy back to the country.
In Pakistan, supporters of the opposition leader Benazir Bhutto are gathering to welcome her back, promising to overthrow the present leader, General Zia, and to test his claim that democracy has been restored.
I don't think that the regime can touch me, because I'm sure people will just burn down the airport.
She arrived in Pakistan, and suddenly there was a kind of electric shock that went through the body politic of the nation. And she really won the heart of millions of Pakistanis, because she was seen as this young, almost frail girl taking on this brutal military dictator with all the authority and the power and the military backing him. People who had been too scared or who hadn't felt like coming out when Bhutto was hanged came out for her. One of the banners they held up was, "Forgive us, Benazir. Forgive us for not having come out when your father was being hanged."
I think she determined early on that she would never have a personal life, that she would be a political leader, but she functionally wouldn't be a woman. She would never marry, she would never have children. But she came to realize that for her to function in a man's political environment in Pakistan, meetings with men, evenings alone, it was very important for her to be married. So in 1987, a marriage was arranged.
Asif Ali Zardari is a man of considerable personal charm.
He was a playboy. Who could blame him? He did not come from Pakistan's intelligentsia or Pakistan's political background. He came from a modest feudal background with roots in Karachi's urban capital.
We owned cinema halls, and our major business was importing foreign movies.
Hard to understand, what a hell of a man.
So I had the opportunity of watching a lot of movies and dreaming a lot.
She came to London and we met, and I said, "Well, what's he like?" And she said, "He's the only one who wanted to marry me."
She was gorgeous. She was the most populous woman in the world, and I guess I was quite taken up by her.
She was the last person in the world that we thought would be part of an arranged marriage. She was like one of the most independent people that we've ever met.
She was moving toward a position of power in Pakistan. She couldn't very well be seen gallivanting with Western men.
I sent her roses and her favorite chocolates, the things I knew about her.
The initial engagement was in my apartment in London.
The whole family I take out for dinners every day. After 7 days, the mother and the other sister and the aunts, cousins, and I all get together and tell her that say yes or no, because we can't keep doing this, so you have to make up your mind.
She was alone so much, and she had been through jail, and I thought she needed pampering, and she deserved a break, basically.
I remember her saying to me, "My mother picked him, but I fell in love with him as though I had met him across a crowded room."
We had 500,000 people, huge affair, much beyond my imagination.
It was incredibly colourful, almost like something out of Arabian Nights.
It was a great time. All my family were there. My mother was thrilled that my sister was getting married. I think she was the happiest person in Pakistan.
Her wedding was almost like a Bollywood movie. It was not an elitist wedding. People would go in and eat and dance. And it was a wedding that actually turned into a campaign itself. So the campaign continued after the wedding as well.
She got the same sort of receptions everywhere wherever she went. In Karachi, a bigger reception than in Pindi. She got equally impressive reception. And the crowd was so emotionally charged that she could have just asked them to take over and lynch Zia, but she didn't, because she believed that she has to restore the sanctity of vote over bullet.
But my party did not want bloodshed. My party does not want violence, and we again repeated that hear the call of the people and give us a date for immediate election.
Benazir Bhutto today challenged you before leaving Karachi to an election showdown. Could you please give us your reaction?
Chivalry forbids me to challenge a lady.
She was expecting, and Zia thought now she's married and she can't do it. He didn't know that my sister's a very determined person.
I travelled with her a lot during the elections, and she was pregnant, during some of the campaign. And she cleverly had fooled General Zia because she knew they would get her medical records and find out when the baby was due and time the election exactly for that, so she wouldn't be able